The morning of July 13th, 2018 dawned gray and overcast across England, but inside Windsor Castle, preparations were buzzing with military precision. Queen Elizabeth II, at 92 years old, had welcomed countless world leaders to her royal residence, but this particular visit promised to be unlike any other. Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, was scheduled to arrive for what the White House carefully called a working visit, not the full state visit originally promised. In the castle's ancient stone corridors, staff members scurried about making final arrangements. The honor guard from the Coldstream Guard stood in formation, their red tunics immaculate and their bearskin hats towering. These were some of Britain's finest soldiers, men who had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, now tasked with ceremonial duties that required absolute precision and unwavering discipline. The Queen emerged into the quadrangle at precisely 4:48 p.m., 12 minutes before the scheduled arrival time. Dressed in a bright pink ensemble with her signature pearls, she carried herself with the same regal bearing that had commanded respect for over 6 decades of her reign. Palace photographers captured her glancing at her watch, a gesture that would later spark countless memes across social media. Meanwhile, Trump's helicopter thundered across the English countryside. Inside, the president was likely receiving last-minute briefings about royal protocol from his advisors. The rules were simple enough. Arrive on time. Let the Queen lead during the honor guard inspection, never turn your back on Her Majesty, and address her as Your Majesty initially, then ma'am thereafter. These weren't complicated instructions, but they required attention to detail and a willingness to follow someone else's lead, qualities not typically associated with Trump's personality. The helicopter touched down in the castle grounds at exactly 5 p.m. Trump emerged with First Lady Melania, both dressed formally for the occasion. The military band struck up the American national anthem as they walked toward the waiting Queen. The 92-year-old monarch stood with perfect posture, her smile diplomatic but warm. This was her domain, her castle, her guards, and everyone present understood the weight of centuries of tradition that surrounded them. As Trump approached, palace staff and security personnel watched carefully. Royal protocol experts had spent days briefing various news outlets about what to expect, and the world's media had their cameras trained on every gesture. The meeting between the brash American businessman turned president and the epitome of British tradition was about to begin, and nobody could predict exactly how it would unfold. What they didn't know was that within minutes, Trump would make a series of moves that would generate headlines worldwide and create a diplomatic moment that royal commentators would call extraordinary for all the wrong reasons. The first sign of trouble came with the handshake. As Trump approached Queen Elizabeth, protocol dictated a slight bow of the head before extending his hand. Instead, the president strode forward with his characteristic confidence, arm extended in his signature power handshake style. The Queen, ever gracious, accepted the greeting with a knowing smile that palace insiders would later describe as amused tolerance. Social media immediately erupted. Twitter users began posting side-by-side comparisons with previous presidential visits, showing Barack Obama's respectful bow in 2011 and other world leaders following proper protocol. But this was just the beginning. The real drama was about to unfold during the inspection of the honor guard. The Coldstream Guards stood, in perfect formation, their uniforms pristine, their discipline absolute. These men had trained for weeks for this moment, knowing that any mistake would reflect poorly on the British military. They remained motionless as statues, eyes fixed straight ahead as the Queen began to walk toward them. This was a routine. She had performed hundreds of times with visiting dignitaries, a carefully choreographed display of British military tradition. But Trump seemed oblivious to the choreography. As they began the inspection, Queen Elizabeth gestured subtly to indicate the proper path and pace. Royal commentators later noted that she was clearly trying to guide Trump, using the same gentle gestures she had perfected over decades of such events. The president, however, appeared to be operating on his own timeline and trajectory. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across the globe. Trump suddenly accelerated past the Queen, leaving her trailing behind him. The 92-year-old monarch, demonstrating remarkable poise, attempted to navigate around him while maintaining her dignity. At one point, she completely disappeared behind Trump's larger frame, creating an image that would horrify royal protocol experts worldwide. The Queen then did something unprecedented. She gestured more firmly, essentially training the President of the United States on how to walk properly during a royal inspection. Palace staff watching from the sidelines later admitted to feeling second-hand embarrassment. One insider described the scene as watching a grandfather teaching a child how to behave at a formal dinner. Royal etiquette expert Grant Harold would later confirm what everyone already knew. He should not walk in front of the Queen, and he did. At one point, the Queen completely disappeared behind him, which should not have happened. The BBC's own guidelines for meeting royalty clearly state that one must never turn your back on Her Majesty, as it is considered rude. But the Queen, drawing on nearly 7 decades of diplomatic experience, handled the situation with characteristic grace. She caught up to Trump, gently guided him back into position, and continued the inspection as if nothing had happened. The honor guard, maintaining their discipline, showed no reaction to the chaos unfolding before them, though their eyes surely noticed every awkward moment. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams, watching from the media area, would later describe Trump as looking like he might as well have been wandering up and down a golf course. The comparison was particularly apt. Trump did indeed appear to be casually strolling across one of his own properties, rather than participating in a centuries-old military tradition alongside the British sovereign. The aftermath of the honor guard inspection was immediate and global. Within minutes of the footage being broadcast, social media exploded, with reactions ranging from diplomatic embarrassment to outright mockery. The hashtag #TrumpVisitUK began, trending worldwide, with users sharing clips of the Queen essentially giving the president a walking lesson in front of the world's cameras. "Did Donald Trump just walk in front of the Queen?" tweeted Hala Mohyeddin, a Scottish television presenter, capturing the disbelief of millions watching worldwide. The footage showed the Queen's remarkable patience as she navigated around Trump's unpredictable movements, her decades of diplomatic training evident in every graceful step. British tabloids had a field day. The Daily Express ran headlines about Trump blocking out the Queen, while the Daily Mail described how Her Majesty had to shoo him out the way. Even typically reserved British publications couldn't hide their amazement at what they had witnessed. The incident became an instant symbol of diplomatic awkwardness, with royal commentators struggling to find precedent for such behavior. Meanwhile, inside Windsor Castle, the Queen and President Trump sat down for their scheduled private tea. The meeting, originally planned for 25 minutes, stretched to 47 minutes, though palace sources remained diplomatically silent about what was discussed during the extended conversation. Palace staff later noted that the Queen appeared completely unfazed by the earlier protocol breaches, demonstrating the same diplomatic grace that had carried her through meetings with 12 different American presidents. Trump, for his part, seemed genuinely impressed by the Queen. He had spoken before the visit about his respect for her, mentioning that his late mother had been a great admirer of the British royal family. During their tea, observers noted that Trump appeared more subdued than usual, perhaps finally grasping the gravity of sitting across from a woman who had been meeting world leaders since before he was born. The president's entourage, however, was in full damage control mode. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and other White House staff spent the remainder of the visit fielding questions about the protocol breaches. Their standard response was that Trump had shown tremendous respect for the Queen and that the meeting had gone extremely well. Royal biographer Hugo Vickers attempted to provide perspective, telling the Associated Press that handshakes were perfectly acceptable between heads of state and the Queen. That wouldn't be required from a head of state or the wife of a head of state, he said, referring to bowing and curtsying. However, he notably avoided commenting on the walking incident. British diplomatic sources, speaking anonymously, admitted that the Foreign Office had spent considerable time briefing Trump's team on proper protocol before the visit. The fact that these briefings seemed to have been ignored created behind-the-scenes frustration, though publicly, British officials maintained their characteristic diplomatic composure. The honor guard themselves, bound by military discipline and royal protocol, made no public statements about the incident. But military sources later suggested that the guards had been thoroughly briefed on maintaining their composure, regardless of any unusual behavior from visiting dignitaries. Their professionalism throughout the chaotic inspection earned praise from military commentators worldwide. As evening fell over Windsor Castle, the immediate diplomatic crisis had passed, but the footage would continue circulating for years to come. What nobody knew yet was that Trump was already crafting his own version of events, a version that would create an even bigger controversy when he shared it with the world. 4 days later, back in the White House, Donald Trump stood before reporters in the East Room, preparing to make one of his most audacious claims yet. The president was supposed to be addressing criticism of his controversial meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, but as was often his style, Trump decided to pivot to what he considered a more positive topic, his encounter with Queen Elizabeth II. "We met with the Queen, who is absolutely a terrific person," Trump began, his voice carrying the confident tone he used when recounting his perceived victories. But what came next would leave royal experts and fact-checkers scrambling. She reviewed her honor guard for the first time in 70 years, they tell me. The claim was so obviously false that it took seasoned White House reporters a moment to process what they had just heard. Queen Elizabeth II had been on the throne for 66 years, not 70. More importantly, reviewing the honor guard was one of her most routine royal duties. She had been photographed doing it countless times throughout her reign, including during Barack Obama's state visit just 7 years earlier. The president continued, seemingly oblivious to the mathematical impossibility of his statement. "We walked in front of the honor guard, and that was very inspiring to see and be with her. And I think the relationship, I can truly say, is a good one. But she was very, very inspiring indeed." In the press pool, journalists frantically typed notes and fact checks. The claim wasn't just wrong, it was easily, verifiably, spectacularly wrong. Within minutes, news outlets were pulling up photographs of the Queen reviewing honor guards with dozens of previous world leaders dating back decades. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams, reached for comment by multiple news organizations, seemed almost speechless. "You can't make sense of it because it makes no sense," he told Newsweek. "It's Trump in Wonderland. It isn't possible to comment on it." He added that the entire embarrassing episode would have been avoidable if he'd only listened to briefings. The reaction from British media was swift and merciless. The BBC, typically restrained in its coverage of international incidents, published a detailed fact-check highlighting the Queen's numerous honor guard reviews throughout her reign. They included a photograph from Obama's 2011 visit showing the Queen doing exactly what Trump claimed she hadn't done in 70 years. CNN's royal correspondent noted that Trump's claim was wrongly made and pointed out the basic mathematical error. CBS News ran a segment titled, "Trump Wrongly Says Queen Reviewed Guard for First Time in 70 Years," accompanied by archival footage of multiple honor guard reviews. Social media erupted again, but this time the mockery was even more intense. Users began sharing compilation videos of the Queen reviewing honor guards throughout the decades, each one directly contradicting Trump's claim. British users seemed particularly amused by the audacity of an American president attempting to rewrite their own royal history. Palace sources, speaking on condition of anonymity, expressed bewilderment at Trump's version of events. One longtime royal correspondent noted that honor guard reviews were so routine that they were often not even mentioned in detailed palace schedules. "It's like claiming the Queen had never worn a crown before," the source said. The White House press office found itself in an uncomfortable position. When pressed for clarification, they couldn't provide any evidence to support Trump's claim about the 70-year gap. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders deflected questions by emphasizing the productive nature of the meeting, but she notably avoided repeating Trump's specific claims about the Honor Guard review. Behind the scenes, State Department officials who specialized in British relations were reportedly mortified. Career diplomats who had spent years building relationships with their British counterparts worried about the long-term impact of such easily disprovable claims about one of America's closest allies. The British response to Trump's claims was swift, subtle, and devastating in its understated efficiency. Rather than issuing angry denials or diplomatic protests, the palace and British media deployed something far more powerful: facts, presented with the kind of dry British wit that had been perfected over centuries. Buckingham Palace, maintaining its traditional policy of never commenting directly on political controversies, instead chose a more elegant approach. The royal family's official social media accounts began posting a series of throwback photographs, seemingly innocent archival images that happened to show the Queen reviewing honor guards throughout the decades. Each post was carefully dated, creating a visual timeline that quietly demolished Trump's claims without saying a word. The first post showed the Queen with President Eisenhower in 1959, inspecting troops during his state visit. The second featured her 1961 meeting with John F. Kennedy, walking alongside the Honor Guard. Then came images from visits with Reagan, Clinton, and Obama, all showing the Queen performing the exact duty Trump claimed she hadn't done in 70 years. British newspapers, famous for their ability to convey devastating criticism through understatement, outdid themselves. The Times ran a simple headline: "Royal records show regular guard reviews." The Guardian published a timeline of honor guard inspections with the dry observation that Her Majesty's schedule suggests this is routine protocol. The most cutting response came from the BBC, which created a segment called A Brief History of Royal Guard Reviews. Using archival footage from their own broadcasts, they showed the Queen performing honor guard inspections during state visits spanning 6 decades. The narrator's tone was perfectly neutral, but the message was unmistakable. Trump's claims were not merely wrong, they were absurdly, demonstrably false. Royal historian Dr. Anna Whitelock appeared on several news programs, carefully explaining the role of honor guard reviews in royal protocol. "These inspections are as routine as the Queen wearing a crown to the state opening of Parliament," she explained with academic precision. "They're fundamental to state visit protocol and have been for centuries." The international diplomatic community watched this British masterclass in subtle pushback with admiration. Rather than creating a diplomatic incident through direct confrontation, the British had allowed facts to speak for themselves. European diplomats noted that this approach was both more effective and more damaging than any angry rebuttal would have been. Meanwhile, American royal watchers and Anglophiles were mortified by their president's claims. The English-speaking Union and other organizations that promoted Anglo-American relations found themselves fielding embarrassed inquiries from their British counterparts. One longtime member described the situation as watching someone claim Big Ben was built last week. British military veterans, particularly those who had served in ceremonial roles, expressed quiet displeasure at Trump's mischaracterization of their traditions. While maintaining proper military decorum, several retired Guards officers gave interviews emphasizing the long history and importance of ceremonial duties. Their message was clear. These weren't arbitrary rituals, but meaningful traditions, with Deep historical significance. The most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: Trump's own State Department. Career diplomats, apparently unable to watch their country's credibility suffer further damage, began privately briefing journalists with accurate information about royal protocol and the history of honor guard reviews. These background briefings, conducted anonymously, provided reporters with detailed timelines and precedents that further undermined Trump's narrative. The cumulative effect was a complete collapse of Trump's version of events. What he had intended as a boastful tale of receiving unique royal treatment instead became a case study in how not to conduct international diplomacy. The incident joined a growing list of Trump's easily disprovable claims, but this one carried particular weight because it involved America's closest ally and most respected royal family. Years later, the Windsor Castle incident became more than just a diplomatic embarrassment. It evolved into a textbook case study taught in diplomatic academies worldwide. The footage of Trump's protocol breaches and his subsequent false claims became required viewing for Foreign Service trainees, illustrating both what not to do and how to respond when visiting dignitaries behave inappropriately. The immediate aftermath revealed the full scope of the damage. Polling data showed that American approval ratings in the UK dropped to their lowest point since the Suez Crisis of 1956. British diplomats, speaking privately, admitted that the incident had complicated their efforts to maintain the special relationship between the two nations. One senior Foreign Office official noted that it had taken years to rebuild the kind of trust that was damaged in those few minutes at Windsor Castle. The Queen herself, true to her lifelong commitment to political neutrality, never publicly commented on the incident. However, palace insiders later revealed that she had been thoroughly briefed on Trump's false claims and had found them puzzling. Her response was characteristically measured. She simply continued performing her duties, including honor guard reviews, exactly as she had for decades. The incident also highlighted the importance of protocol briefings, which became more detailed and insistent for subsequent high-profile visits. The State Department created a new position specifically dedicated to preventing similar embarrassments, and diplomatic protocol training was expanded to include sessions on cultural sensitivity and the importance of following local customs. For Trump, the Windsor Castle visit remained a source of pride despite the widespread criticism. In subsequent interviews and rallies, he continued to speak positively about his meeting with the Queen, though he eventually stopped making specific claims about the honor guard review. His supporters viewed the controversy as another example of media bias, while critics saw it as emblematic of his broader approach to international relations. The British military, meanwhile, used the incident as a teaching moment about maintaining professionalism under unusual circumstances. The Coldstream Guards, who had stood at attention during Trump's awkward inspection, were quietly commended for their discipline and composure. Their ability to maintain perfect military bearing while chaos unfolded around them became a point of pride within the regiment. The media coverage of the incident evolved over time, becoming a reference point for discussions about diplomatic protocol and the importance of cultural awareness in international relations. Journalism schools began using the story as an example of how to fact-check political claims and verify historical assertions. Perhaps the most lasting impact was on royal protocol itself. While the basic rules remained unchanged, palace staff began developing more detailed contingency plans for handling protocol breaches. Future state visits included more explicit briefings for visiting dignitaries, with clear consequences outlined for failure to follow established customs. The honor guard review that Trump claimed was the first in 70 years had actually been the 127th such review of Queen Elizabeth's reign. The Queen continued performing these inspections until her final state visit reception in 2022, just months before her death at age 96. Each review served as a quiet reminder of the traditions that endure regardless of temporary diplomatic storms. In the end, the Windsor Castle incident became a perfect example of the collision between protocol and personality, tradition and disruption. It demonstrated that while diplomatic norms can be bent, they cannot be broken without consequence, and that sometimes the most effective response to bombastic claims is simply the quiet presentation of facts. The Queen's grace under pressure, and the British response's measured effectiveness became the lasting lessons of an encounter that nobody involved would ever forget.